Hi, guys. Welcome to part 3B of writing the sustainability speech. Now, in part 3A, we looked at adding rhetorical devices, and I gave you examples of different rhetorical devices. But I thought I would add the part B, which was not originally a part of the series. I thought I would add it because one of the things I constantly see or I constantly hear are speeches which finally have the structure, the proper problem effect solution structure for the persuasive speech, the sustainability speech, but they still sound informative. And I think that is because there's not enough emphasis on understanding that this is a problem that we need to fix. So your body language needs to speak to it. And your voice needs to tell us that it's urgent. And your language needs to say, this is a problem. Now you remember that maybe in the first or second video, I spoke about Nancy Duarte and her what is and what could be structure. So she says that when you're doing a persuasive speech, you need to toggle between this is what life is like, but this is what it can be. So what is, what could be. What is, what could be. And you need to do that from the introduction. Because what you're constantly saying to people is, this is how things are, but they don't have to be like that. This is what they could be. So I'm going to take us to Martin Luther King's speech, and I'm going to show you what she actually came up with, how she analyzed his speech, so that she found where he did the what is, what could be structure. So the book that I'm going to be using by her again is Resonate. Guys, it's another excellent book. You know I always study about the good books, right? This one is good. So it's same Nancy Duarte, but this is a little bit different, or I should say a little bit deeper. So let us take a look at what she showed us about Martin Luther King's speech. And please, you have to watch his speech, even if it's only the first 5 minutes. But you need to feel what he's saying so that when you do your persuasive sustainability speech, it won't just be you talking to us, looking at us and being all strict and, but we want to hear that passion, that persuasion. If you think that this is so important, then we don't want you to just tell us and look at us like, yeah, do it if you want, do it if you don't. No, we want you to show us how important it is. So let's have a look at what Nancy came up with. Okay, so the first thing she did on page 204 was give us a breakdown of the different things that Martin Luther King did in his speech that made it an excellent speech. So she spoke about contour, which for her meant where he went between what is and what could be. That's the first thing. Then also she mentioned his dramatic pauses. And you also need to listen out for them so that you get a better feel for how you can use them in your speeches. Then she also mentioned repetition, which we know he did a lot of that. I have a dream, I have a dream, I have a dream, I have a dream. So it's good if you can find a phrase that you keep repeating throughout and make it a phrase that speaks to your general idea, not just any old phrase. I had a student yesterday or 2 days ago, when he did his inspirational speech, he kept saying heart over height. I fell in love with that phrase. Shout out to you, Samuel. And he was saying that he was a short guy, and in wrestling, he always ended up with the tall guys where he would look up and up and up. And he did it. Dramatic, right? Yeah. Heart over height. So find a phrase that you can keep using. Okay? Another thing she mentioned, which we will see, which we will hear when we listen, was the use of metaphors and visual words. And we'll soon look at a few. She also mentioned his use of familiar songs, scripture, and literature. Then there were political references, applauses, and pacing. Those are not as important to us. But when we go to look at how she did the breakdown, you'll see some of these anyway. So keep that in mind. I hope you've watched the speech by now, so that now that we're looking at the analysis of the speech, it will make a lot of sense. Promise you. Now, when we talk about what is, we're talking about life as it is now. And of course, we're talking about what it could be. That's the promise you're saying to people. That's the promise you're giving to people to say, we can aim for a better future. So I'm saying let's sustain friendship. And I'm saying that because this is how we are now, but this is how we could be. No, I didn't do that in my speech, but I should have. But let's say you're talking about the sustainability of relationships. Then you're going to have to paint a picture of what it is now. And when you paint that picture, you want to use all the metaphors, all the pauses. You want to put as much drama in it because you want people to feel the pain. And then you're going to be saying to them, but it doesn't have to be like this. Here's what it could be like. So if you're talking about the sustainability of the environment, the sustainability of tolerance, the sustainability of music, the sustainability of reading, whatever it is, if you want to have that impact, then you have to paint the picture of what it is and what it can be. And when you paint the picture of what it is, it really needs to seem bad. So let's have a look at what Martin Luther King did, how he showed you how bad things really were. And I'm not going to go through the entire speech, but I'm going to pick out parts which work. Okay? Okay, so he started out by saying, I'm happy to join with you today. Okay, he didn't quite say it like that. I am happy to join with you today in what will go down in history as the greatest demonstration for freedom in the history of our nation. Now, you notice when I started, I was racing a little bit, and then I remembered, oops, nope, that's not how we do it. That's not how you're going to win any hearts and minds if you're hurrying. Because once you start hurrying and you're saying it fast, people, it's just a natural reaction. But when you slow things down, people lean in and they listen. And that's what you're going for. So first he thanked them, and then he said, 5 score years ago, a great American in whose symbolic shadow we stand today signed the Emancipation Proclamation. This momentous decree came as a great beacon light of hope to millions of Negro slaves who had been seared in the flames of withering injustice. It came as a joyous daybreak to end the long night of their captivity. But 100 years later, the Negro still is not free. 100 years later, the life of the Negro is still sadly crippled by the manacles of segregation and the chains of discrimination. 100 years later, the Negro lives on a lonely island of poverty in the midst of a vast ocean of material prosperity. 100 years later, the Negro is still languished in the corners of American society and finds himself an exile in his own land. So we have come here today to dramatize a shameful condition. Powerful. Now, I think he could have easily said, even though there's been emancipation and Negroes are now free, they're not free. Not really. He could have said that, but he didn't. He used some of the most dramatic metaphors. Now, the metaphors are in pink, so let's just take one. Seared in the flames of withering injustice. Rather than saying they're treated unfairly, he said, seared. Now, if you think of the word seared, think of brandishing. Think of one of those long torches where when you put it on somebody's hand, it leaves the scar, the deep scar, which never goes away. I don't know if it's like tattooing. I don't know. I don't have any tattoos, so I don't know. But the meaning of the word sear is to burn or scorch the surface of something with a sudden, intense heat. So think of that image. He's not just saying they're treated unfairly. He's saying that they're seared. And that's what you need to do. As you have to look at your words, and you're going to find metaphors that give us a better visual image. So another one is sadly crippled by the manacles of segregation. Now, when you think of the word manacles, you're thinking of chains. You're thinking of something like this, where it's tied to people's ankles, it keeps them bound, and he's trying to paint this picture. So I want you to think of the picture that you want to deliver in the minds of your audience members, and you're going to use the strongest language that will communicate that. So you're not just going to say they're tied up. You're going to say they have manacles and they have shackles. And of course, you couldn't just say manacles and shackles. Manacles, shackles. See? Huge difference. Am I right? And so, that is what he wanted us to see. He wanted us to visualize that. Now, he goes on for the first, 3 minutes. For the first 3 minutes, he paints that picture of what is. Now let's take a look at how he contrasted it with what could be. So he said, so we refuse to believe that the Bank of Justice is bankrupt. We refuse to believe that there are insufficient funds in the great vaults of opportunity of this nation. So we have come to cash this check, a check that will give us upon demand the riches of freedom and the security of justice. In other words, it's our time now to no longer be enslaved. But he didn't just put it like that. And he's saying what can be. Okay? But he also is giving us some more metaphors. The Bank of Justice. We refuse to believe that the bank, and when we think of a bank, we think of money, we think of millions. And he is saying, we don't believe it's bankrupt. There's a lot more there. And now I know most of us these days only know about e-transfer, but there was a time that you would go into the bank and you'd get the checkbook and you would write the number on it and you'd give a check to people. I think people probably still do that, but that's not as popular anymore because we can e-transfer. So you're talking about back in the day, way back in the day, even before my day, because I think he died around the time I was born. I think so. And I'm 55. Okay. So he's talking about insufficient funds. Because now, when you try and use your debit card at Safeway and you have no money, it says insufficient funds. Same thing. We're talking about then, where people would draw a check and you get that stamp, insufficient funds. And he is saying, no, we've now come to take our check to the bank and we're cashing in. We want our money. We want our freedom. Okay? So this is one example of the what is and what could be. Now you need to get the textbook, guys. Trust me, if you really want all of this juicy stuff. But let me show you a couple more examples. So another section, at the 4th minute, he says, we have also come to this hallowed spot to remind America of the fierce urgency of now. This is no time to engage in the luxury of cooling off or to take the tranquilizing drug of gradualism. He's saying now is the time, not later. But that is how it is. And in the next minute, he switches to what could be. Let's have a look at that. He says, now is the time to make the promises of democracy. Now is the time to rise from the dark and desolate valley of segregation to the sunlit path of racial justice. Now is the time to lift our nation from the quicksands of racial injustice to the solid rock of brotherhood. Now is the time to make justice a reality for all of God's children. So he spoke about what it was, and now he's contrasting it. The same thing you have to do in your speech, but you want to always make sure that you use words that show the contrast. And he shows it by saying, now is the time. So when you're showing the contrast, try to see if you can add repetition also, because you're driving your point home. Now is the time to me, now is the time, now is the time, now is the time, and then he goes back to what is. So from minute 5 to 6, he says all that he says here. And then he says the whirlwinds of revolt will continue to shake the foundations of our nation until the bright day of justice emerges. So that is what is. And now he's contrasting it again when he says, but there is something that I must say to my people who stand on the warm thresholds which leads into the practice of justice. In the process of gaining our rightful place, we must not be guilty of wrongful deeds. So he's saying, I know you're angry, but let's not turn around and do illegal acts. We must not be guilty of wrongful deeds. Let us not seek to satisfy our thirst for freedom by drinking from the cup of bitterness and hatred. In other words, don't be a hater. We must forever conduct our struggle on the high plane of dignity and discipline. We must not allow our creative protest to degenerate into physical violence. Again and again, we must rise to the majestic heights of meeting physical force with soul force. I think I've shown you enough. What is, what could be. As you write your speech, look for opportunities where you can show what is and what could be. And as you find these opportunities, you're looking for ways to use the correct language that will express it. So in addition to your voice and your tonality, you're going to look for opportunities to use gestures, to make your body language talk, to show what you are saying and show the contrast, because that is the key to a persuasive speech. Being able to show the difference between what is and what could be, the contrast. Because why would you want change If things are not good like you say, why make them look good? You think it's bad? Show how bad it is. Emphasize how bad it is by showing what it is, using all the metaphors that will show how bad it is, and then contrasting it with how good things could be. Does that make sense? Okay, so I hope Martin Luther King's speech has given you some great ideas and some inspiration also. As you incorporate all the things that you learned from watching his speech, I wish you good luck. And don't be afraid, guys, to just try something new. Even if it feels a little unnatural at first, if you find repetition isn't really your thing, give it a try. Try it on. You never know. Keep trying until it gets good for you, okay? It works. So I hope you enjoyed this and I hope you learned a lot. And I'll see you in the next video. Bye for now.